Will have your chance to participate. We did say it's going to be a discussion, so we will open the floor when our panelists are finished. And as we move to panelist number 4, I hope you're making notes. So, if you may have a question or a comment, when the floor is open, you'll be able to do that. Moving on, we have Kyle Joseph. He's a Wapichan man from Ishalton, South Rupununi. After attending Queen's College and Pearson College in Canada, Kyle has been working in the Rupununi in various capacities, all towards overall village development. He's deeply passionate about working for his people and sharing the many experiences of the Rupununi. As the senior stakeholder engagement coordinator at Conservation International Guyana, Kyle works closely with actors across the Rupununi landscape, which allows him to appreciate the many perspectives that are needed to advocate for Indigenous societal development. Let's put our hands together for Kyle Joseph.
Good evening, everyone. I get what you're feeling. I feel really special after they introduced me there. I get that. Thanks so much for being here tonight. I think last year was the first year something like this was held, and I thought it was really wonderful. And so it's good to see a tradition starting. I'm on the fence of how long I'm going to take because so much of what I want to say and some of my messages, I think, have already been said by those on the stage to my right. But as someone mentioned earlier, we need to talk more, right? There's more to be said. There's definitely more chances that that need to be made available for ourselves to talk about the things that affect us. And looking at the program that you all have, I look at these topics, and quite frankly, any of them I would have loved to talk a little bit deeper on, and we'll have a chance for that. What I'm focusing on tonight is the impact of protected zones on Indigenous life. And it is my hope that I leave you with some thoughts to ponder on, some ideas to ponder on. In no way do I think of myself as the expert on protected zones or protected areas. But I do work, as you heard, I do work with Conservation International, and I do live near a protected area, which is the Kanuku Mountains Protected Area. I am Indigenous. I am from Ishalton. I'm a Wapchan. And so a lot of the things that I have to say have been, it comes from the people who I've grown up with, the people I interact with on a daily basis. And so I want to acknowledge them and the ways in which they have shaped my thoughts. The topic is I think, it's a very complex topic when we begin talking about protected areas. It's very nuanced. And so before I get into it, I want to ensure that there's facts that we shouldn't be arguing about, and then there's opinions that I will share for myself, and obviously everybody here has been sharing some of their own facts and opinions as well. So maybe we can start at the global level, and these are very basic facts. These are things I think each of us should know about. At the global level, about 25% of the Earth's surface is controlled by Indigenous people, 25%. So that's something around 38 million square kilometers across 87 countries. It's huge. That's the global stage. We come down a bit smaller now, we think about South America. In the Amazon biome, very rich in biodiversity, very important. We call it the lungs of the world. 25% of that is controlled by Indigenous people. And if we think about the protected areas within the Amazon biome, that amounts to somewhere about almost 50% of the Amazon biome is controlled in some way, either by government or by Indigenous people. So that's South America. Let's talk about Guyana now. Anybody know how much protected areas we have in Guyana? 5. And that covers about 8.5% of the country's landmass. Doesn't sound big, but in the context of Indigenous peoples, it directly affects 7 out of the 9 Indigenous nations. I could be corrected, it may be all of them, but directly, because there's the Conishan, which affects the YY people, there's Kanuku Mountains, which affects the Makushi and Wapchan and so on. I say that I bring up these facts because the story that it tells us is that unequivocally, indigenous people are the stewards of nature across the world. That's a fact. Are we arguing that fact? No? All right, great. I heard a no there. Um, so that's the story. Those are the things that we should know when we talk about protected areas and their impact on indigenous people, and taking it from the global stage to what's happening here in Guyana. And if you do a simple Google search on protected areas or national parks, you'll find that uh, the concept or the idea of national park started loosely somewhere around the 1800s. If you heard of the Yellowstone National Park in USA, that was one of the first parks in the world. Um, but we know as indigenous people that conservation or protecting nature has always been part of our culture, right? We rely on the land, we use the land, we protect the land, as Kimal said earlier. If it wasn't for us, then what was it you said of us keeping everyone else alive? um, we hunt, we fish, we use the forests, we use the savannas, the mangroves for food, for materials, for our traditional way of living. And for those of you in the room, maybe listening on live, understand that across Guyana, this still happens, and we just heard that, right? It still happens. People still hunt, people still fish, people still, you know, burn to get farms. People still go to the river and bathe. People still use the river water to cook. That's still happening. Don't think of that as something that's in the past. It's not happening. It's right here in our country, and that is still happening. I and I work with communities. Through my work, I help to kind of develop some village plans. I work with mapping, and when you do mapping with the community, and you can probably talk a little bit more about this as well, is that they understand very intimately the world around them. Where to find a particular bush, where to find the animals, a very particular animal. They know it better than anybody else. So when we going back to the ideas of national parks and protected areas, we see that the idea of national parks or protected areas was based on the idea that nature is pristine, it's untouched by humans. It is an area where that's a beautiful harpy eagle. Those are wonderful leatherback turtles. Let's protect those, right? Let's draw some lines around them up. You can't go in there. That's generally how people think about it, huh? But we can talk about the consultative process that has gone into coming up with some of these areas. But I think at the end of the day, it has introduced a new governance system, something that indigenous people must now learn to navigate. And indigenous people are wide. There are a lot. Don't when you close your eyes and think of an indigenous person, please don't be thinking of just one image. Look at this stage right here. I think we in experiences and in looks, we're very diverse. Um, we have our own aspirations, our own dreams of what we want our communities to look like. Um, and I say that because when we begin to talk about the impacts and how we should think about managing protected areas and how we should interact with protected areas, we need to have all of these voices at the table. And I see you're talking about participating in the decision-making process just now. And so we can learn a little bit more about what it means for indigenous people to be at the table of in making these decisions. I talked about and I said earlier that I live near the Kanuku Mountains protected areas, and I just mentioned that it's a new governance system that indigenous people must now navigate. If you look at the management plan, and I think you might see this in the management plans of the other protected areas, you will see the term, you will see that it says that it allows for traditional use of resources, meaning subsistence hunting, subsistent hunting, farming, um, and of course within limits. And so that what that tells me is that on one hand, yes, we are allowed to practice our traditions to some extent. You know, we're allowed to farm, to hunt, to fish for our own needs. But on the other hand, I think that for me it raises questions about what do we mean when we say traditional needs. Because although we are the stewards of nature, um, it's a fact that the world is changing. We depend a lot on money. It's driven a lot by capitalism, Um, and as I just mentioned, us on stage here and communities at large have aspirations just beyond what has been done traditionally, right? Um, you know, the youths today and not tomorrow, today, the youths today want to be, we want to be lawyers, we want to be doctors, we want to be entrepreneurs. We want to do more than what it is that our parents have done before us, like anybody else, right? Um, an entire communities depend on things like logging, depend on mining, to bring in that money to those communities to build a better community for themselves. So if if we are to think about protected areas and the governance systems and how we manage these protected areas and think about how it should impact the lives of indigenous people, indigenous voices need to be at that table. And I don't think we talk about consultations, and in my head when I think of consultations, I think of a team traveling to a particular area. They will talk with the community, they will get their notes, and they take those lovely notes and they go back or come back to Georgetown and make decisions, right? um, I think that, of course, that needs to be improved. So not just as an afterthought, but as really key decision makers in things that affect our lives. And I think that Conishan is a good starting example of what that can look like. I think we can do better, especially um, of how indigenous people having their own kind of protected areas. And as I mentioned, we need to also redefine what we talk about when we say traditional needs, because a community that has traditionally planted cassava, traditionally made farine, how are they then using their own skills, using their own resources, what it is that they know, how can they commercialize that to make, to improve the lives in the community, right? If we think of a fisherman, traditionally has fished all his life, this is what he knows. What if he wants to start a fish business and do more than just provide more for his family, right? Are we just keeping him in a little cage saying, no, you can only provide for your family and that's it? We have aspirations. Communities have aspirations. We want to, and I work with communities. I mentioned just now, I do a lot of village planning, and so I sit with a lot of communities, talk about what it is that they see for their future. And you can look at, I don't know if anybody here has ever looked at a village plan, but you will see things like they want better roads, better health facilities, better schools, right? Things that need this, at least, right? So I think for us to give space for indigenous communities to make these decisions, especially those that are at the borders of these protected areas, we need to have a bigger dialogue about what that can look like in the future. We need to talk about how it is that they can play a bigger part. And I think, as I said, right now it's very important. I don't know how much of you understand or know about 30 by 30, which is where Guyana is, well, not Guyana only, the rest of the world, but in the context of Guyana, we're aiming to protect 30% of our lands by 2030. And so Indigenous people need to be part of how we get there. Because are we creating new protected areas for this, right? Are we inviting Indigenous people for it, do their lands become protected areas, right? And it's not just about the 30 by 30, it's about this greater change that is happening across the world, and especially coming into Guyana. And speaking from the Rupununi, I think of things like this nice big tar road that's supposed to reach to Letem from Georgetown to Letem. They're talking about it long. It's supposed to happen soon. I don't know. So let's say. There's talk about big agriculture, right? I think it was a couple of years ago I read a news article where I think it was the Minister of Agriculture talked about, oh, look at all this lovely land we have in the Rupununi for big agriculture, right? It will change what my Rupununi looks like. So Jacinta said it earlier, visit Rupununi. I don't know if it will look the same in the next couple of years. I do hope it does. But there's a lot happening around for us to be more proactive about how we preserve Indigenous life, how we preserve this natural beauty. Will we still have the North Rupununi wetlands, right? How is that going to change, right? And so we need to have a bigger discussion, and Jean will talk about us being in decision making. We need to be at that table, because I do think that protected areas can be a tool, not just for protecting biodiversity, for protecting our ecosystems, but I think it's also about protecting our way of life. And while protecting our way of life, giving us space to have ambitions and aspirations. So, I don't think the idea of protected areas is going anywhere soon. So that is something that we have to talk about. But I do think that with the right approach, protected areas it can be tools for both conservation and Indigenous development. So that's it for me. Thank you very much for listening. I invite questions later.